Tonight at 10, Jeremy Corbyn says he'll take Labour to power and deliver the socialism of the 21st century. He told the party conference it was time for everyone to unite, to fight the Conservatives and to be ready for a general election, possibly next year.
So I ask each and every one of you to accept the decision of the members, end the trench warfare and work together to take on the Tories.
We'll have detail and reaction from the Labour conference in Liverpool. Also tonight, Sam Allardyce admits the mistake which ended his career as England football manager, but hits out at the journalist who caught him.
It was an error in judgment on my behalf, and I paid the consequences. But, you know, entrapment has won on this occasion, and I have to accept that.
It was a Russian missile that destroyed a passenger plane over eastern Ukraine in 2014, according to investigators. We talked to the president of Chile, who is fighting to change the country's anti-abortion laws, among the strictest in the world. And a Champions League classic between Celtic and Manchester City in Glasgow tonight.
In the south, the wait for answers goes on. Police investigating the Shoreham air crash are denied access to evidence by a judge, and a tidal tradition that's being revived. Water polo played in the sea.
Good evening. Jeremy Corbyn has told the Labour conference that socialism for the 21st century will be the foundation of the party's programme, as he urged delegates to be prepared for a possible general election as early as next year. He urged colleagues to end what he called the trench warfare of the past year, and he set out a series of policy pledges, including nationalising the railways and defeating Conservative plans for more grammar schools. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, listened to the speech in Liverpool.
The leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn.
Coming out on top, in charge of his party. So what happens now? There's no change in the devotion of his followers. But this is his offer to you.
Thank you. It's the socialism of the 21st century. Our job is now to win over the unconvinced of our vision. No one will be convinced of a vision promoted by a divided party. We all agree on that. So I ask each and every one of you to accept the decision of the members, end the trench warfare and work together to take on the Tories.
To suits at the front, supporters at the back, he made his 10 familiar promises, coming to a leaflet near you.
For full employment, a homes guarantee, security at work, a strong public national health service and social care, a national education service for all.
Vows too on climate change, public services, inequality and peace. His articles of faith.
Don't worry, conference, they're not the 10 commandments. I haven't come down from the mountain with them.
There was no bold offer to colleagues who didn't support him. He needs them if Labour can convincingly make this attack.
This isn't a new government. It's David Cameron's government repackaged with progressive slogans, but with a new, harsh, right-wing edge. Who seriously believes that the Tories could ever stand up to the privileged few? They are the party of the privileged few. Their only plan is the return of grammar schools, segregation and second-class schooling for the majority. Labour is standing up for education for all.
There'd be a bigger tax on business to pay for education. But despite the referendum result, on anxieties over immigration, his aims to ease the strains, not cut the numbers.
A Labour government will not offer false promises on immigration, as the Tories have done. We will not sow division by fanning the flames of fear. We will act decisively to end the undercutting of workers' pay and conditions through the exploitation of migrant labour and agency working. Labour will reinstate the Migrant Impact Fund and give extra support to areas of high migration.
He was confident, but in his comfort zone. And 10 years after Tony Blair made his last conference speech, Mr Corbyn was applauded for opposition to Iraq.
I believe it was right to apologise on behalf of the party for the Iraq war. Right to say that we learned the lessons.
He had stern words on anti-Semitism and abuse and urged the party to forget their private battles and focus on the public.
We are 500,000 of us, and there will be many more, working together to make our country the place it could be. Conference, united, we can shape the future and build a fairer Britain in a peaceful world. Thank you.
It was a grand-sounding vision for socialism for the 21st century. But it was more Jeremy Corbyn's greatest hits, a broad outline of his long-held beliefs, than a detailed argument to persuade you to vote Labour at the next election.
Do you think the public is ready for 21st century socialism?
Or do you know what? They're ready for it, they need it. And I think it's our job now to explain to them how this system is leaving them behind.
And I'm very pleased that we've got 21st century socialism. I'm absolutely delighted.
Very well received in the audience. I think it goes right down well in the country as well.
The people's flag is deepest red.
Jeremy Corbyn's supporters believe his Labour is much more than a cover version of the party of old. But echoes of the past are all around. He's inspired thousands on the left, but is yet to show that millions will join his chorus. Laura Kunsberg, BBC News, Liverpool.
Sam Allardyce says he will not rule out a return to football despite admitting an error of judgment which ended his career as England football manager after just one match in charge. He'd been secretly filmed by reporters offering advice on how to bypass the rules on player transfers. He said he'd been the victim of entrapment. Our sports editor Dan Rowan has this report. There are some flashing images in it.
Many said Sam Allardyce came with baggage when he was appointed England manager. And today, bags packed, he left home humiliated for a holiday he hadn't been planning, stopping to talk for the first time about the undercover newspaper sting that cost him his dream job.
On reflection, it was a silly thing to do, but just to let everybody know, I sort of helped out what was somebody I'd known for 30 years, and unfortunately it was an error in judgment on my behalf, and I paid the consequences. But you know, entrapment has won on this occasion, and I have to accept that.
I would have thought £100,000 a time.
Allardyce became England's shortest serving ever manager after the Daily Telegraph secretly filmed him securing an in-principle £400,000 deal with journalists who were posing as businessmen. The FA took a dim view of his words about avoiding transfer regulations and his disparaging remarks about predecessor Roy Hodgson. With their credibility as the moral guardians of the game on the line, Allardyce's bosses deemed his £3 million a year position untenable.
English football is a bit of a laughing stock, I'm sure, around the world. It's very, very embarrassing for all concerned. Not a nice situation to be in. Got to move on, got to get results in the next 3 or 4 games.
The barely believable events of the last 48 hours have left the FA reeling here at Wembley. Allardyce's departure raising serious questions over their judgment in appointing him, but also their ability to govern a globalised game that's changing beyond recognition, with unprecedented amounts of money and greed, disparate ownership and ever more powerful clubs and agents. And the crisis is getting worse. The Daily Telegraph has today alleged that 8 current or former Premier League managers have received bungs for player transfers. Their latest film shows an agent saying he knew an ex-manager that had more backhanders than Wimbledon. Even the body that represents agents has now admitted the system is broken. One former FA chairman had this to say.
If you looked at the sort of figures that are going out to agents, they are gigantic now. And at some stage, someone has to say, hang on, this is all money going out of football. This has nothing to do with football.
With the threat of more damaging headlines to come, today the government expressed its concern, demanding a full investigation, a warning to the FA that this is now about confidence in the way the game is run and not just one manager's spectacular fall from grace. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Wembley.
An investigation led by Dutch experts has concluded that the missile which shot down a Malaysian airliner over eastern Ukraine in 2014 was from Russia. There were 298 people on the flight, MH17. No one survived. Most of the passengers were from the Netherlands. The Russian government has dismissed the investigation as politically motivated. Our transport correspondent Richard Westcott has been studying the findings.
Caught in the crossfire of someone else's war, in busy skies that were meant to be safe. Nearly 300 people were on flight MH17, 80 of them children. It was brought down by a Russian-built Buk missile. Both sides in the war have them. Now criminal investigators say they're closing in on those responsible.
On the 17th of July, flight MH17 was shot down by a Buk missile fired from farmland in Pervomaisky, and the system was brought in from the Russian Federation territory and then returned to the Russian Federation afterwards.
This recreation from investigators suggests the missile launcher crossed over the Russian border on the morning MH17 was shot down. Here's a tapped mobile phone call from 9:22 a.m. An officer tells his commander it crossed the line. Now, the line he's talking about is the Russian border. There's no attempt to hide the launcher, which is sat on the back of a Volvo truck. Lots of people took pictures and films. They put them on social media. Here, it's parked up in a lay-by in the city of Donetsk. The final destination was a farmer's field near the town of Pervomaisky, which was controlled by Russian-backed separatists. Now, firing left these scorch marks on the ground, and locals took pictures of the smoke trail. It's then filmed heading back to Russia. Crucially, one of its missiles is now missing. President Putin's top spokesman has reiterated to the BBC that Russia had nothing to do with it.
We've been ruling out, and I've been ruling out, the fact that any Russian weapons were shipped to Ukraine, any Russian army members, any Russian troops were inside Ukraine, and we're still ruling out that possibility.
Bryce Fredericks and his girlfriend Daisy were on board MH17, heading for a dream holiday in Bali.
It's a big step towards the truth, a big step. We're not there yet. Of course, we want to know exactly who, names and why, especially why.
Investigators say they're down to 100 suspects for who fired the missile. Even if they do eventually name names, it's by no means certain that whoever did this will face a court of law. Richard Westcott, BBC News.
The US Congress has voted overwhelmingly to reject President Obama's veto of a bill that would allow relatives of the victims of the 9/11 attacks to sue Saudi Arabia. It's the first time in his presidency that Mr. Obama's veto has been overridden in this way. Relatives of the victims of 9/11 want to sue Saudi Arabia over its alleged backing of the hijackers. Mr. Obama argues that such lawsuits would damage relations with Saudi Arabia. The US Secretary of State John Kerry has warned his Russian counterpart that Washington will end talks on Syria unless Moscow stops the bombing of Aleppo. In a phone call with Sergei Lavrov, Mr. Kerry said that the US held Russia responsible for the use of incendiary and bunker bombs in the city. Today, the UN Secretary General said that conditions there had become worse than a slaughterhouse. Shimon Peres, the former president of Israel and recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, has died at the age of 93. He was one of the defining figures of the Israeli state and played an essential role in forging a political deal with the Palestinians back in the 1990s. He'd been in hospital in recent weeks after suffering a stroke. Mr. Peres was one of the generation of Israeli politicians who laid the foundations of the new nation in 1948, as Ola Gerin reports now from Jerusalem.
Israel has lost its eminent elder statesman, born before the state and one of its great defenders. Shimon Peres was a key figure in the Middle East and on the world stage, where he was celebrated as a tireless campaigner for peace. There were tributes today at home and abroad.
Shimon devoted his life to our nation and to the pursuit of peace. He set his gaze on the future. He did so much to protect our people. He worked to his last days for peace and a better future for all.
The US Secretary of State said a towering figure was gone, but his influence would remain.
Everybody who knew him, admired him, who was inspired by him, and by his example for the pursuit of justice and peace, will continue, I know, to remain inspired and motivated by him.
The former Middle East envoy, Tony Blair, said he was a friend, mentor and inspiration.
He was someone that I, will always respect and cherish. And he always used to say to me, anyone who occupies a high office in a government, they've always got to work out, do they want to be in the guest book or the history book? And I think it's pretty clear that his place belongs in the history book.
His history began in Poland in 1923. As a child, Peres came to the Holy Land when it was still under British rule. He worked alongside David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding father, negotiating deals that helped the new nation become a formidable military power. Peres was the prime mover behind Israel's nuclear program, and initially a strong supporter of Israeli settlements on occupied Palestinian land. At the Israeli parliament this evening, flags flying at half-mast for the last of the generation who built the state. Shimon Peres was first elected to parliament in 1959, and here at the Knesset for decades, he helped to shape Israeli life. He held virtually every major post, and during his long years in politics, his political views changed. The man who was a security hawk became a champion of peace. Peres was one of the architects of the Oslo Accords, Israel's first peace deal with the Palestinians, which promised so much.
What we are doing today is more than signing an agreement. It is a revolution. Yesterday, a dream. Today, a commitment.
He shared a Nobel Prize with the late Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat and the then Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Today he was described as a partner for peace by the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, but others were more critical.
Everybody here remembers him as the man who lost the opportunity for real peace by deceiving the Palestinians with the Oslo Agreement and ending up deceiving the cause of peace.
At the end of his long life, peace eluded Shimon Peres. Now that he's gone, according to President Obama, a light has gone out.
The tributes to the Israeli statesman Shimon Peres, who's died at the age of 93. And with me is our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, to talk about his contribution and his legacy. Jeremy, what's your assessment?
Well, as you've been hearing, he was a man who, throughout a very long career, did a number of things, and he never wavered from his desire for Israel to be the strongest power in the region. And so he did a lot to build up the armed forces, to make sure that they got to a place where they could get nuclear weapons, even though they don't acknowledge that they've got them. People know that they're there. And then later in life, he decided that the other side had changed, that a deal was possible with the Palestinians, with other Arabs as well. And so he didn't waver from Israel, wanting Israel to be strong, but then he decided that peace was a good idea. Now, it hasn't worked out. The dreams, I was just looking, we're both looking at those pictures 23 years ago on the White House lawn. And as you said, it seems like a world away. I mean, I remember looking at that, and the thing about both the Israelis and the Palestinians who were involved in that at that time, they really thought the world was changing. And sadly, it did not. But I think that, here's a man who came to Israel as an immigrant when it was under British rule, when it was an agrarian, undeveloped society, with the exception of some cities. And now, he goes to his grave seeing, before he died, he could see the remarkable transformation, which he was a big part of. And I think that's something which certainly is where he sits in Israeli history, that he was part of the development of the state from the very beginning, and his death closes a chapter.
Jeremy, thanks very much again. Jeremy Bowen there. Well, with that, let's have a brief look at some of the day's other news stories now then. Ben Emerson QC, the most senior lawyer working on the child abuse inquiry for England and Wales, has been suspended. A statement by the inquiry said that concerns about aspects of his leadership were now being investigated. Junior doctors in England have lost their High Court battle, challenging the legality of the controversial new contract which is set to be introduced next week. The judge rejected arguments that the Health Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, had exceeded his powers. The Department of Health has welcomed the ruling and called on junior doctors to move on. There's continuing speculation about the future of Deutsche Bank after it was forced to deny that it was in talks with the German government about a possible bailout. The bank has seen its share price collapse in recent weeks over worries about its profitability, bad debts and the huge fine it faces for a mis-selling scandal in America. Now, the body which represents the British car industry says continued membership of the European single market is the only way to guarantee the industry's future. It's the strongest warning yet from a major trade association on the possible impact of Brexit. The car industry contributes nearly £20 billion a year to the British economy, according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. Our business editor Simon Jack reports now from the Paris Motor Show.
A Tour de France for the UK's car industry. Today, in the shadow of the Eiffel Tower, British-made cars from Aston Martin to Vauxhall were lined up alongside each other. This was no showroom, though. This was delivering a message. Only continued membership of the European single market can protect the UK's car industry.
The future success and our current strength, and we're incredibly successful at the moment, that is under threat if we're not part of the single market.
People will say we buy a lot of German cars. It's a very important market for foreign manufacturers. They would be crackers to get into a tit-for-tat tariff war. Things are going to be okay. A way will be found.
We will always buy cars from abroad. However, if you're talking about building cars and developing cars in the UK, you need to be part of the single market. Even if you had a free trade agreement, you'll still have to complete all the administration and processes of having a trade deal. That adds cost. Anything that adds cost makes us uncompetitive.
The simplest way to leave is also the biggest threat to jobs. Falling back on the rules of the World Trade Organization could place tariffs of 10% on cars and components. A terrible result, according to one of the UK's biggest car makers.
And if we would have, say, 10% duties to pay on parts, for instance, that would be something that customers would have to pay. It would potentially affect jobs. Also, if we export to Europe and become less competitive, maybe we could sell less, we would have fewer jobs in the UK.
Now, publicly, the big companies are saying, let's wait and see. But privately, behind closed doors, like here at the Eiffel Tower, they are worried that the perceived increased probability of a hard Brexit, that is out of the European single market, could mean tariffs, it could mean a restriction on the movement of people, or both. They're also worried that this whole process could drag on for years, and those are years in which they need to start making decisions on where the UK is going to fit into their European, into their global manufacturing strategy. Today's message was aimed at the UK government. Trade Minister Mark Garnier said he understood the concerns, but he didn't seem to be able to offer much reassurance.
Well, we can't guarantee anything, but as I say, we're not going to provide a running commentary on what X is going to look like. But there are elements that we need to protect. In the case of the automotive sector, those things we must protect and try to achieve is zero tariff access.
A demand to remain in the single market seems unrealistic, when even hoping for the desired clarity still seems a long way off. Simon Jack, BBC News, Paris.
There are only 6 countries in the world where abortion is unconditionally illegal, where a woman can be prosecuted for terminating a pregnancy, whatever the circumstances. One of those countries is Chile, where the country's first ever female head of state is now trying to change the law, introducing a bill to allow abortion in certain limited circumstances. But Michelle Bachelet is facing some powerful political opposition, as Rita Chakrabarti reports.
Chile is a sophisticated nation in which some old attitudes endure. Abortion here is completely banned, forcing women sometimes into terrible dilemmas. There are private clinics and black market drugs, but not for the poor. Pro-choice groups in shock campaign videos say a DIY abortion is their only option.
Cuidado con mirar hacia atrás, porque se pueden arrepentir. Cierra los ojos.
When did you find out I spoke to two women who found they were both carrying fetuses which had no possibility of survival. Neither was allowed an abortion, even though Andrea's life was under threat. Doctors told Paula to pray. Both had to carry their babies for months and give birth to them without any hope they'd live.
I felt just like a zombie, like The Walking Dead, who just had to get up every day without wanting to live. It was torture.
For my part, I feel powerless, having to live this process after having my daughter declared unviable. I suffer unnecessarily, not just me, but my family as well, until this day.
Hello. President Michelle Bachelet is on a mission to change things. Previous governments have tried, but her bill to allow abortion in some cases has gone much further than any other and has majority public support. I told her what had happened to Paula and Andrea.
I think it's awful. It's awful because I have had friends who have gone through that process. And usually it really sort of emotionally destroys the person. There are some people who might be able to live with it, and that's okay. But there's a lot of people who really are destroyed emotionally afterwards, and their lives are changed forever. So that's why we do believe that they should have the possibility to decide.
But change is slow, and President Bachelet's bill is limited in its scope. It only allows for abortion in 3 particular circumstances: if a woman's life is in danger, if the pregnancy is the result of a rape, or if the baby has no chance of survival. None of this goes down well with the church, which fears the bill could eventually usher in abortion on demand. Many of its flock agree.
Hay días que estoy bien y hay días que estoy en el hoyo.
Gloria is one. She was raped as a child by a cousin and was pregnant at just 12. The family arranged for a termination, which she says she has never recovered from.
In my case, if I had a choice, I would have had my daughter. But it wasn't my choice. Abortion scars you for life, before and after. It scars you negatively for life, and nothing good comes out of abortion. Nothing. Nothing.
Her church is part of the organised campaign against the government's abortion bill. Gloria tried to take her own life several times, and her church has proved a haven. A typical service here is as much rock and roll as religion.
No hay ni mujeres ni doctores procesados por aborto en Chile.
But the message on abortion is clear.
Exacto. Ellos están haciendo un programa de la BBC sobre mujeres.
Michelle Bachelet wants to change both the law and entrenched attitudes in this male-dominated society.
Women are seen as citizens of second class and not full citizens.
She faces political as well as social challenges, but Chile could now be on the cusp of giving its women the choices their mothers were denied. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Santiago.
Well, let's turn then to tonight's football. And in the Champions League, there's been an action-packed match in Glasgow between Celtic and Manchester City, while Arsenal took on the Swiss champions Basel. Our sports correspondent Joe Wilson was watching.
It takes something to stand out in the crowd. Amongst 60,000 voices, one which sold 100 million records. Could you spot Rod? Celtic's atmosphere may be unique. The players have to respond. It took them 2 minutes, 21 seconds. Dembele's goal. Anyone shouting offside would not be heard. 9 minutes later, Celtic's players looking for an offside flag and not getting one. Fernandinho for Manchester City. The evening began frantic and then just accelerated. Celtic back ahead. The last touch came from a City boot. Raheem Sterling didn't mean that goal. He knew plenty about the next one. Quick, back down the other end. 2-2. We've not played half an hour. Now this was getting ridiculous. Dembele again. Second half, that's 3-2, isn't it? No, it must be 3-3, Man City again. And guess what? The goals finally stopped. A thrilling draw to Rod's choreography. Theo Walcott scored both Arsenal's goals in their 2-0 win over Basel. At a time when England needs someone to inspire English players, third favourite for the England job is Arsene Wenger. Joe Wilson, BBC News.
Well, Newsnight is about to begin on BBC Two with analysis of Jeremy Corbyn's speech to the Labour conference in Liverpool today and the latest on the plight of the people in the Syrian city of Aleppo. Here's Evan.
Tonight, we have footage from inside a hospital in the besieged Syrian city of Aleppo. We'll see doctors doing their desperate best for children in the most dire of circumstances. Do watch. Join me now on BBC Two, 11 p.m. in Scotland.
That's Newsnight with Evan here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.